one of the interesting phenomenons that we've seen very recently in a couple of these by-elections where the Conservatives were expected to have an easy win. Like, this is a Conservative safe seat. The Lib Dems will never win here. They're having a complete laugh. What are they doing here? And all of a sudden, what's this? The Lib Dems have won. How did this happen? Well, in a lot of the, shall we say, the after action reports, one curious thing has started to come to the foreground, and that is farmers. Farmers who were very, very traditional, the Conservative core voter down there, who would normally vote Conservative, have been switching over to the Lib Dems. Now, why is that? Well, very, very much since Brexit. If you've been listening to when we've covered things from like the National Farmers Union, or we've covered things from like Farming Weekly, farmers are not happy, not only with the Conservative Party, but in the way that they are doing things with Brexit. And I would not be surprised if in the near future we didn't see a really big farming protest of some sort against certainly the Australian trade deal, because the Australian trade deal has pretty much put a ticking time bomb on, well, farmers' livelihoods of about 15 years. And that just got signed into law last week. Something, if you may remember, MPs were promised a vote on, but it wasn't even put to MPs. So, as the title of the article says, so much for taking back control. But before we do go into today's article, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page, my one-off donation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can buy me a coffee. And of course, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel. There's the YouTube thank you button. And of course, the YouTube subscription thing as well, where you can join the Pony Club. So, as always, thank you very much to all the people who do support the channel. So over we go to the West Country Voices today, or the West Country Bylines today, as it normally is. So, or it's not West Country Voices, sorry. But I think it's normally, this is the Bylines spin-off, I think. So, the title is, MPs didn't get a promised vote on the UK-Australian trade deal. So much for taking back control. And we never ever was going to happen. They were never ever going to give you a vote on it because they didn't want the trade deal scrutinized. They didn't want a vote on it. It is simple as that. So last week, the government ratified our first new trade deal since Brexit, and your MP didn't get a vote on it. Is this what Brexiteers meant by taking back control? I'm talking, of course, about the UK-Australian trade deal. It's fairly insignificant in economic terms, and of course the government's official impact assessment suggests that the trade deal resulting from the deal will just add 0.08%, yes, 0.08% to our GDP. This, of course, is in stark contrast to the 4% of our GDP we are losing as a result of leaving the EU. But the deal is going to have a big impact on farmers, and the government received advice that the Australian deal would have a negative impact on our agricultural and food sectors, with jobs lost in both the agriculture and forest sectors. And Liz Truss explicitly denied this hit to farmers when answering questions about this deal, and it only emerged in a following Freedom of Information Request Act by Emily Thornberry. Farmers are understandably angry that Parliament did not get the promised vote on this deal, and that these concerns of those living in the rural constituencies and that their representatives were ignored, as NUF President Marie Batters said over the weekend, saying, "The situation with the UK-Australian trade deal not going to Parliament is classic, quite honestly. The government gave a clear commitment, not only to the industry, but to all NGOs and parliaments, that they have broken that commitment. And there are massive questions around what this means for future free trade deals. It is not just the economic impact, of course, that matters. The deal is a Trojan horse to drive down environmental standards. If farmers from other countries face less restrictions on their use of antibiotics or use of pesticides that are illegal here, then their production cost will be lower, and UK farmers will be forced in a race to the bottom or face oblivion. Trade deals agreed without any input from your parliamentary representatives will be used to trash our food and farming standards. The importance of this undemocratic process goes way beyond this one deal. These trade deals are going to be the way that we establish our position in the world after leaving the EU. And if the Australian deal sets a precedent, the role of global Britain will be decided without your representative being part of that debate or even having a vote. So, how is this possible that Parliament did not get a vote on something so important? Now, I'm going to put my white coat and specs on for a bit now to explain the cobweb mess of this British Constitution. The main point of note is here that we have rather a dualist rather than a monist system. That means that trade treaties, being international law, are agreed by the executive, meaning the cabinet, rather than the legislature, that being the parliament. Of course, back in 2010, Parliament passed a new act called the Constitutional Reform and Government Act, which in theory ensures that Parliament can hold up treaties it didn't like. But while the principle is established, the government still controls the parliamentary time, and this government decided not to allow parliamentary time for our representatives to debate the Australian trade deal. So much for parliamentary sovereignty. When I was an MP, when I was an MEP, I was able to make the case for farmers in southwest England that I represented in all trade deals that the UK entered into as a member of the EU. Trade policy was an area where member states were withheld full powers from Parliament, so we could not amend treaties, only vote for or against them. But the fact that we had power to block them, as the European Parliament demonstrated in the case of the anti-counterfeiting trade agreement back in 2012 did, meant that our voices had influence. How ironic that the promise of Brexit was to restore parliamentary sovereignty and end the power of unelected bureaucrats. The Australian trade deal was written by trade negotiators who are the very the epitome of unelected bureaucrats, and our Brexit government prevented Parliament from voting on it. As members of the EU, we enjoyed the highest level of civil rights and environmental standards in the world. Part of the point of Brexit was to undermine those, and the trade deals will be used as wedges to open them up to attack by competitors whose practices not only damage people and the environment, and that is why it is so vital to democracy and to the people who represent us to have a say and a vote, and why the government sidelining in Parliament over the Australian trade deal is such a dangerous precedent. So, of course, this was going to happen. Of course, the government would never ever do that. First of all, they didn't want scrutiny to happen. They didn't want them to start, MPs start seriously poring over this trade deal and start looking and go, actually, this is quite bad. Because they knew full well there would be possibly a rebellion, certainly by those constituents who had that big farming voting bloc. And remember, part of the big split in the Tory party is on regulations, because you've got the far right side, most of them backed by the ERG and the far right of the party, who are free market fundamentalists who want no government regulation any way, shape, or form. So as far as they are concerned, getting rid of these regulations through these trade deals is perfect for them. But then, of course, you've got the other side, who are sort of the more moderate Tories, and they understand the need for regulations. Of course, you can say, how far or what they want, but they're not like, the other side that want to completely get rid of them. So there would have been an interesting split. And I think if this had come into Parliament, this would have been quite an interesting test of what would have happened to the Tory party had this type of trade deal been put forward. And I think it is definitely something that MPs and opposition MPs should be shouting about, that they didn't get a vote and that they weren't offered a vote on this. That would be very interesting. In fact, What would be interesting, if you happen to be a member of the Conservative Party and Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak happens to be at one of your hustings, this should definitely be a question you should be asking them of why didn't, RMP get a vote on the Australian trade deal, which you promised they would? Are you not for parliamentary sovereignty anymore? Just just a simple question, you might want to ask them. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can buy me a coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.